Dudes, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be working on the tube chassis OBS. As you saw in the last videos on this truck, we have been working on getting the trunk and all the stuff in the trunk situated. In today's video, we are going to be continuing with that theme. We have the spare tire that needs to be mounted, so I ordered a Y-strap and 3 tabs from CarTech, as well as getting the spare tire mounted. We're also going to be working on the front of the truck too. I took some time and got the header panel just sitting roughly where it needs to be. It's sitting a little bit too high right now, but it's just sitting on these pipe stands that I had the rear of the truck sitting on before. This is something that needs to get mounted. I wanted to just get it up here. It's not sitting at all where it needs to be. I just wanted to get an idea of what I need to do to mount this to the truck itself, as well as the clearances that I have for the radiator that I'm going to be mounting in the front of the truck too. So I'm going to have to build a front bumper off of this at some point underneath once this is mounted as well. But all this stuff is going to be happening after we get this spare tire mounted. So the very first thing I need to do for this is get this spare off, or this tire off the truck, so I could use it for a spare. And then we can get the tire up here, the strap on it, and then we can start figuring out where the tabs are going to go in each corner, and then one somewhere up here in the top. So now that the spare's up there, it did take me a couple minutes just because I am here all by myself today. Nobody's here to help me, so getting a 40-inch tire up above, basically up to my nipples, it's not a fun thing to do. So that's up there now. We got the strap on there. I do have the tabs sitting on here just kind of roughly where I want to put them. They actually stand on here pretty good by themselves, but the tabs don't necessarily fit the best onto the tubing because it is just a flat surface that the tab has. So what I'll do is I'll come back in here with an angle grinder, notch both sides out to get it to fit perfectly, and then I'll sand this down to get it ready for welding. And then I'll come in, tack them in place, and then I'm probably going to TIG weld these on just because it's going to be something that you're visually going to see. I want it to look nice. Everything on this truck is basically MIG welded, but I have started to come through and TIG weld just little accent things in here, so I think these being TIG welded is definitely the move. I went ahead, got these prepped. The first thing I'm going to do is get this first one on in the front of the tire. The reason behind that is I'm thinking I'll tack this on here exactly where I want it, get the hook on here, get that latched, and this hook will actually be able to hold the strap from being able to move around. So I'll be able to pull tension on the strap and then get the back ones tacked in place as well, and then I'll be able to come in and burn all these in. So now that I have one corner just slightly tacked, just a fusion tack, there's no filler added, I'm able to move this little tab around and get it exactly where I want. And then once I have it sitting exactly where I want it to be, I can go in on the other side with a little bit of filler, add filler to the tack, and then come back to this other side, add a little bit of filler to this tack. The reason I add a little bit of filler instead of just fusion tacking stuff is because the fusion tack is a little bit weaker than adding some filler material in there. So it's definitely good to have a little bit of bite when you have your tacks on here, especially if I'm going to be putting tension on this. I don't want to just use fusion tacks. And just like that, we have 4 tacks on here. This tab is not going anywhere. You can go ahead, clamp this on here, and I can start getting the back 2 tacked in place as well. So now that the front's all tacked in place, I can go ahead and get these rear tabs tacked in too. I did go ahead and get a notch put on both of these little flat surfaces to get the tab to sit around the surface of the tube right here a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and burn these in right now, or just get them tacked in place. Second tack right there. Just make sure this thing realistically only needs 2 tacks to hold it in place, but I'm gonna add a couple more just for the safety of the thing not wanting to move around when I go to finally weld everything. Because if you have just 2 tacks holding it, it will sit here and hold it fine, but as soon as you light back up on this and go to make a full pass, it's gonna warp it and pull it over. So I usually put 4 tacks on something like this. I'll put 4 tacks, 1 in each corner, and then it should hold it nice and tight when I go ahead to weld it. Just finishing up getting this trunk lid all put back together. Super happy with the way these tabs came out for the spare tire mount. Got them all TIG welded on there. All three are on and finished. And then we also got these center tubes MIG welded onto the rack as well, just to match the rest of the stuff that was already on here. Super happy with the way this came out. The next thing that could be done is the paneling for the top of this, the tin work, with a cutout for the trans cooler to be able to suck air through. But I don't think I'm gonna be doing any of the panel work on the back of this truck, at least not as of right this second. So for now, this trunk lid is finished and we can move on to the front of the truck. Like I was showing you guys before, I did have the header panel somewhat mocked up on the front of the truck, but I did pull it off, so there's nothing up here anymore. I got it on the bench. I'm trying to figure out, I'm probably gonna end up using some 1-inch tubing, some 065 wall tubing to mount this header panel to the front of the truck with some heims. So the heims I'm gonna be using are these right here. They have a little, they don't have misalignment spacers. They're basically built into the heim itself. And then I'm gonna use 4 of those so I can adjust the header panel a little bit with the heims and get everything exactly where I want it. But my thought as of right this second is I'm gonna do a tube structure that follows the outside of this, and then it's gonna use this hole right here, this hole right here, and then this hole and this hole. And we're gonna use bolts that go through that and some plate to tie everything together. And then that structure will be tied into some tubing that comes off of the front of the truck. So it's a little confusing right now, but it'll make a lot more sense when I actually get to show you guys. Before I get too far, I do have a box right here that's supposedly a brand new header panel that he wants to use on the truck. So before I get too far with that one, I want to make sure this is exactly the same thing. There's actually a lot more in the box than I thought. So we do have a brand new grill. We have the headlight bezels. We have some headlights and then blinkers. And we also have the header panel. So this is the part that actually gets mounted to the truck. This is all brand new. I'm gonna pull this out and probably just double check with what I have over there to make sure it fits, but just to get a rough idea what all this stuff looks like. The headlights are a little bit different, but same grill. This is what the truck's gonna look like when it's finished. You can just picture that on there. It's gonna look pretty dang good. All right guys, so it's been a day or two since the last clip. I did take some time to figure out exactly how I'm gonna be doing this header panel mount, and the majority of that time I was just waiting on getting materials here. So I am gonna be using some 1-inch 065 wall tubing to make the substructure for this header panel. I have a couple pieces cut out already. This main long piece is gonna actually end up sitting inside of this little valance piece. There's a little bit of a gap here. I'm actually gonna have it sit down inside of here and then run along, come underneath the bracket that actually holds it in, and then it's gonna come up to a piece of tubing that's gonna run across here off of this tube, which will be one of these guys. This will end up going here, and then we'll have a tab that comes off of this tube that runs to this hole and this hole. And then I had Bruce bring over a 1/2-inch dimple die, so I'll be able to run a bunch of dimple dies in the plate right here in between the header panel and the tube. So, but there's 2 bolts here and 2 bolts here. I may tie into those off of this main structure too, just to add a little bit more rigidity. But once I have these pieces all in place on both sides, I'm gonna see how sturdy this thing actually is, and then we'll go from there. I'm just kind of playing this by ear. I've never mounted one of these things solely by themselves before. Usually, like on this truck, you can see the header panel itself, which is this piece right here, actually just bolts to the main core support that comes stock on these trucks. So all this back here is all steel, and that's the main part of the core support that it mounts off of. But we don't have that on this truck, obviously, because there is no frame, there's nothing stock left on it. So just mounting this up on its own is going to be a task within itself. The first thing though is going to be getting this main tube bent. We need to get it tucked inside of this valance piece right here. So the first thing we need to do is get this tube, mark center line on it. So this is an 80-inch tube, mark center line, so that'll be 40 inches. And then we'll know right here that's the center of this whole header panel, and then we'll get it thrown in the bender, put 2 bends on it, and then we'll get it thrown back in here and see where it's at. I'll probably start with about a 15-degree bend. It's probably going to be closer to 20 degrees, but I always like to start lower and then work my way up with degrees, because you can always put more bend into something. You can't necessarily take it back out. So we'll start with 15 degrees and then see where she sits. I just got done getting some bends put in this tube. I ended up putting 3 bends all together in this, 1 on each end and then 1 right in the center, just a nice 5-degree little kick. I think the next step off of this is gonna be getting the plates made that sit here. I gotta grind this nub off, but it'll use this bolt hole and then this bolt hole right here, this top one. All right guys, so as you can see, I did get these plates and this tube tacked together. I got this plate cut out. Probably gonna come in and take some material out of here later just to make this look a little bit better. I don't like how much material is sitting here with just blank. I don't like that, so we'll figure something out with that once this is completely made. But those 2 are tacked together there. We got this side tacked together as well. And then I just have this tube sitting kind of where it's gonna be sitting inside of the little valance piece right here. So you can see it's gonna sit in there pretty nicely once it's all tacked together. But the next step is gonna be now notching this end, getting everything to fit. So it's basically gonna be sitting right here off the tube inside of the valance. I did realize I'm kind of screwing myself. I'm gonna have to cut this apart somehow to be able to still use this bolt hole to mount this. So I just got the sections cut off that were hindering me from being able to get this thing off when the tube's actually sitting in here. So as you can see, this piece right here, let's see, how did this sit in here? Sat in there just like that. There's 1 piece on each side, but as you can tell, it did completely block all this in to where I wouldn't be able to get a tube inside of here. So goodbye. Now that this is cut out of the way, as well as this side, I can go ahead and get the valance piece bolted back up to where it was on the header panel, and then hopefully get this main tube tacked up into place inside of here and inside of the valance. This stuff, I've been working on this all day long. I've got a couple pieces of plate, 2 tubes tacked together, and that's literally it, and a piece of tubing that has a couple bends in it. Doing stuff like this definitely takes a lot of work. I've never mounted something like this before, so especially when you're dealing with tight tolerances around stuff, it's gonna take time. So just give yourself time on stuff like this. It's not just gonna happen. At the end of the day, it's gonna be worth it, because all this stuff is gonna be tucked nice and tight inside of here and tucked nicely to the header panel. So it's 100% worth it in the end. Well, you saw me just get this all tacked together. I cannot be more pumped on how this came out. I literally don't think I could get this tube any more perfectly fit inside of what I was trying to get inside of. Look at that. You can barely see the tube popping out. Barely see the tube popping out. This side, you can tell it's nice and tight to this edge here. And then on the bottom side, it does have a gap. Could probably center it up inside of there, but I like exactly where it's at right here. Nice and tight, comes up nice and tight on the corners, up to the notch. Same thing on this side, notch, comes down nice and tight in the corner. It's literally perfect. So now that all this is in and tacked in place, I think the next thing I'm gonna be doing, I'm kind of just winging this. I don't know exactly where I'm going, but there is these 2 holes. I think I mentioned them before, that I can tie off of. That's where this header panel actually mounted from originally. So these holes out here aren't what this is meant to be doing, but I'm doing it that way because I wanted to be as far out on the core support holding it as I could be, just for strength and rigidity reasons. If I'm in here, everything past this point, if I didn't have anything out here, all this would be able to shake and do weird stuff. So that's why that's over here. But I do have these holes, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with these yet. I may not do anything. I may tie it in. I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm just winging it, so we'll see what we come up with next. So it's been a couple days since the last time I picked up the camera. I have been working on getting this header panel just pinned exactly where I want in the front of this truck. It has turned out to be quite the task getting this thing exactly where I wanted it to be, but we did get it just sitting exactly where we want it. Right now, as you can see, it's just pinned right here with a bunch of just random pieces of scrap that I have tacked between the header panel and the engine cage and the upper arm. These are literally just here to keep this solidly mounted so it doesn't move around while I'm trying to make mounts for it. But I have run into a couple more issues. So when I was cycling the 40-inch tire, it did come in here and eat a lot of this blinker and headlight. So I ended up having to push this whole entire header panel 4 inches further forward than stock, just to clear these tires at full bump and full lock. So the tire would be fully turned to the driver's side of the truck. And it would come up in here and just eat all this stuff. So it was pushed forward. We do have it sitting pretty much exactly where I want it. So now I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to be mounting the radiator up here. Just a couple different ways I could be doing the mounts to mount this header panel, as well as how the bumper is going to be built underneath all this stuff, because all this is going to be tied into each other. It all kind of has to work with itself. So I can't just mount the header panel, mount the radiator, then do the front bumper. It all kind of has to be done at the same time, because my thought process is the header panel mount right here, I'm probably going to be using these two little stubs that I have already made in here, and then just a piece of tubing in between them. This just bolts to the core support. There's a bolt right there, a bolt right there, just mock-up stuff for now, but kind of get the idea. That's going to go from here probably to the engine cage right here. Kind of have a tube made up with a heim already on the end of it. Should look something like this. So the heim with a couple tabs and a bolt holding it in right there off the engine cage. It'll come down, land right on the top of there. The reason I'm putting a heim on here is because you'll be able to either tighten or loosen this, and it will actually change the angle of the header panel itself. So the lower side mounts that I'm going to be doing down here will just be on bolts, and it'll be able to pivot. It will be a fixed point though at the bottom, and then at the top I'll have these heims, so I'll be able to rock this thing forward and backwards to get it to line up perfectly how I want it later down the road. Currently working on getting this side tacked in place. I got the top tab all in. I'm working on getting this bottom tab made. I wanted to show you guys just a little trick that I learned. So to figure out where the bolt hole needs to be on this to land through this tab once it's underneath here, the way I find out where the bolt hole actually needs to be on here is I will take some anti-seize and I'll take the brush and just mark the bottom side of the bolt just like this. Wipe the excess off just enough so it'll leave an imprint on the plate. And then what you do, or what I do, is pull the bolt up just enough to where it's out of the way. Take the tab we need, put it in place, and then when we have it up against the bottom of the heim, make sure the bolt's below, or actually above, where the misalignment spacer is, so it's not actually touching yet. Then you can get this plate on here, get it exactly where you want, and then when you have the right angle and exactly where you want it on the truck, push the bolt down and turn it around a couple times, and it'll leave a perfect little mark on your tab where you need to put your bolt. So I couldn't do it on camera, but you can see right there, it's exactly where the bolt needs to go and the hole needs to be drilled. So I can center punch that, drill the hole out, and then we got a tab that'll line up exactly where it needs to go on here. Another cool little trick that I know is to space these out, because if I just welded this or tacked this in right now with nothing in between the misalignment spacers and the tabs, and I weld all this in, it's going to be very difficult to get this heim in and out after it's all welded. So what I usually do is I'll take a 20,000th shim out of a shock. You can get these online. You can get them at Down South Motorsports. You can get shims from them. So I'll usually do two to space these out, so it'll give it a 40 thousandths just kind of clearance, just to get everything to slide in nice and easy. And then this distance right here, even though it is easy to slide in and there may be a little bit of movement back and forth, just the tiniest little bit, once you tighten this bolt, it'll squeeze all that away, so it's not a big deal. But it just makes things a lot easier to get in and out, especially when you're dealing with something heavy like this once it's all said and done. So yesterday afternoon, I did get the top of the radiator mounted. I didn't get it on camera though because my brother was filming a video on the Bug, getting his exhaust all mounted. That video should be up on the channel now. But as you can see, top of the radiator is mounted. I ended up just coming off of the main support for the header panel here. Just some 1-inch tubing to a little smaller stub. And then inside of the stub on the bottom side, I hole sawed out a piece of plate, drilled a hole in it for this size bolt, and then welded that plate basically to the bottom of this tube. So it's inside of there. You can see the head of the bolt right there. But it's just going to another little bolt that's in the radiator itself. That's gonna hold the top part of it in, and then we can go ahead and start building the bottom side. What I'll probably end up doing on the top two still is I'll come in here and add a plate, probably with some type of dimple die in it, just to add some character, just like everything else. But that should be more than enough for the top of this radiator. The bottom side, I do just have a piece of tubing tacked to the center of the bulkhead right now. That's just holding the radiator up for the very moment. That's not the actual mount or how I'm going to be mounting it. For now, I need to start building a bumper up off the front of this thing, because the bottom of the radiator and the bottom of this whole header panel is going to be mounted off the bumper. So I need to start laying that out and figuring out where I'm going to be landing the mounts and stuff like that off the bumper once I start making it. Probably going to be doing some 2-inch tubing as the main tube, just like I did on the Ranger, and then just some 1.5 and 1 3/4 stringers all throughout it. But it's going to be the same concept, just tucked really tightly to this valance, probably basically like flush with it. That's what the customer wanted, so that's what we'll be doing. I think I'm going to call this one here. We did get quite a bit done on the front of this truck, and we did get the spare tire mounted. I do kind of want to give you guys a little sneak peek at a future video. I did get some new parts in. Got the Blitzkrieg Motorsports sway bar arms that are going to be going on this truck. These things are super nice. Very high quality stuff. 35 spline axle or torsion bar that goes in it. I'm going to be doing a full video on just the sway bar setup on this truck, so be on the lookout for that. I also have the fuel cell coming tomorrow, so the rear of this truck is going to be getting worked on again once the front's finished. So both of those things are going to be coming up in future videos, so keep your eye out for that one. If you guys like what you just saw, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.